This one's going to be sort of a little, I want to call it fun topic, but it'll get a little bit off the beaten path. I wanted to do a little something. Again, Will asked me to take at least something of a lecture I did last year somewhere else and include that here. Really, that focuses on pop culture and how certain religious ideas are being mediated or communicated in pop culture. And again, you're going to see connections to certain points of Gnosticism in this, like you'll see connections to other things as well. And so, science fiction and cinematic theology, what I want to focus on is because of the influence of media, especially entertainment media, what are people going to be thinking, in the next generation? Again, people who are sort of raised on media, that really get their information, again, from YouTube, from movies, from television shows, and there's a plethora of these kinds of shows today that are taking very familiar theological ideas, very familiar religious ideas, whether it be from Judaism or Christianity or something else, and they're recasting them, recrafting them, reframing them in certain ways to communicate certain ideas. In other words, to steer people's thinking in a certain direction. That is, ultimately, in many cases, away from anything we would sort of call a traditional Judeo-Christian theology, or a biblical theology. But yet, what's being given to the public has certain attachments to those ideas. It's just that they're reframed and recast. So what I want to talk about here is who or what is or are the deity or the deities for the post-Christian person. Because we live in a post-Christian culture right now. Christianity is losing, and I would say has lost its cultural dominance. Even though that sounds negative, I think it's true, or if it's not true now, it'll probably be true in 10 or 20 years. So what is that going to be replaced with? How are people going to be thinking? And that's the fundamental question here. What's the deity or the deities? What does salvation mean? And how is this theology communicated? So let's start with the deity first. I mean, lots of people would opt for nature as being the replacement for traditional theism. And the academic term for this would be monistic paganism. Monistic, again, is the idea that everything is one. There is no clear-cut distinction between creator and creation. All is one. And that's really what paganism is at its heart, whether it be nature worship that's very overt, or again, sort of making God an impersonal force that operates within nature. That's monistic paganism. And we already see this kind of thing in the Green movement, and this is historical as well as contemporary. This is nothing new. Just a few books that you might be interested in. The Green Gospel, the New World Religion. Again, a lot of these things are going to gravitate toward uniting all religions around a certain central idea or a small set of ideas. And there are a number of religion scholars who see the Green movement as being a possible uniting force that sort of will preempt certain parts of different religions' belief system. But this is the thing that will sort of run through all of them, or at least be able to sort of take over all of them and unite into one, again, monistic system. Other books that discuss the same thing, again, most of these are academic titles. Dark Green Religion, Nature, Spirituality, and the Planetary Future. I want to show you some of these because people, again, scholars of religion, this isn't just like pop apologetics here by Christians who hate environmentalism. Right? These are serious scholars who see the trend, and they see the open door and the trajectory of the thinking. And so they're studying it. That's what scholars do. So nature, spirituality, and the planetary future. This sacred earth, religion, nature, environment, again, is a fairly popular tome on this topic. The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. All of these are academic presses or academic publishers, either university presses or other academic publishers. These are all serious books. And this is not, Billy Bob published something on his website, sent it to Zulu. Okay, and I'm not showing you that stuff. I'm showing you the real stuff that's being discussed in the academy. Nature is enough, religious naturalism and the meaning of life. And for a lot of people, this is going to be the orienting principle. Really, their God. The planet will be their God. Gaia, the mother, the whole idea. That's where a lot of people mentally and theologically and spiritually are going or have gone. In this category, I would put something called the monistic biocosm view. This is probably a little less well known. This is the book by James Gardner, obviously called Biocosm. The subtitle reads, The New Scientific Theory of Evolution. Intelligent life is the architect of the universe. Okay, the universe essentially makes itself, but not quite. Wait till you see what Gardner says. Gardner is a graduate of Yale Law, Yale College, studied philosophy, theoretical biology. He's not a scientist by training, but he has published scholarly articles, peer-reviewed articles in science journals. The quote up here, Martin Rees, who's the astronomer royal, promoting his book. Gardner is sort of a darling by certain people in the science community to popularize this idea, biocosm. Here's a quote about the book. Science writer and amateur cosmologist Gardner proposes a startling theory that catch this, pre-existing, super-intelligent race that inhabited a mother universe created this one and tweaked the physical laws in its baby universe to ensure the continuity of intelligent life and of the cosmos itself. So all that you think or we think we know about the universe was put here by intelligent design. You see how they just deftly stole the intelligent design argument? Of course it's intelligently designed, but it's not by a god. It's by a super intelligent race from some other universe that created this one and fine-tuned it so that it functions really well on its own. And that universe itself will produce intelligent life forms. That's you and me. So we've just taken intelligent designer and put an S on it. Okay? It's real simple. And I have been waiting, I have been lecturing about this for years because it was very apparent to me 10 years ago or whatever that the intelligent design movement, as much as I like it, is going to be really easy to steal. And this is, again, probably the most well-known popular example. But it's still, again, it's an academic word, but, it's promoted by scientists, even though Gardner is not a scientist. Very easy to do. And a technological culture like ours that is already predisposed to the idea of, the giant spaghetti monster in the sky, as Richard Dawkins likes to refer to God as. This idea that there's this man running around somewhere in space or whatever, other dimension, who's God. Since they reject all that, this is a nice workable alternative. Now, some are going to be totally materialist and aren't going to buy the extraterrestrial thing, but most astronomers, this is so obvious. You can literally see this every day in the news if you're getting your news online. Every day there's going to be some article promoting life elsewhere in the universe. Especially now, we have water on Mars, and so we go from water to, an intelligent race, the cell phones or somewhere else. There's this huge leap in logic, but that it gives the thought legitimacy. Why? Because the idea is that life here evolved from, again, microparticles or whatever that produced us. Well, why can't the same process work somewhere else? It's very simple thinking. And in the scientific community, it's considered very coherent thinking. And so if there isn't an extraterrestrial race out there, well, maybe this works. We get to have gods, but not be really accountable to that God. And another one by Gardner as well, The Intelligent Universe, AI, Artificial Intelligence, E.T., we know who that is, and the Emerging Mind of the Cosmos. This is sort of his follow-up volume. Some would say, no, our God isn't going to be nature, it's going to be ourselves, our inner space, our intuition. Here are some popular books. Again, you may not have heard of either of these authors, but DMT, The Spirit Molecule, A Doctor's Revolutionary Research into the Biology of Near-Death and Mystical Experience. Okay, basically, that what you think of as God is some little part of your brain that gets stimulated by certain events. Or drugs. Okay? Hallucinatory drugs. Terence McKenna was a well-known figure in the LSD movement. And this was his thing. Search for the original tree of knowledge, a radical history of plants, drugs, and human evolution. Basically, that religion derives from mystical experiences brought on by the use of drugs. And you can have those experiences right now. For $19.95, no, it's not like that. You have to go get your LSD somewhere else. Okay? But you get the idea. So the deity is really inside us to be discovered through our minds. You know, and our mind, then they'll fill in the gaps with New Age talk. Our minds are eternal, and we'll go back to the great realm of consciousness. And here you get your Gnostic tie and all that stuff. So that's a possibility. Another possibility under the ourselves category is technological transhumanism. This is probably one that more people have heard of. The merging of man and machine and all that sort of talk. Really propelled largely through the influence of this man. Anybody recognize him? This is Ray Kurzweil. Okay. Even a guy like Glenn Beck, talks about Ray Kurzweil. Everybody talks about Ray Kurzweil, it seems. Kurzweil is an inventor. He's an entrepreneur. He's a public intellectual, science guy. He's sort of a Renaissance man, actually. But he's the major figure promoting transhumanism, that we need to use technology to defeat death, to become more than what we are. He talks about the singularity a lot. That moment when artificial intelligence and computer technology merges with humanity, we're no longer able to keep ahead of it. We essentially have to merge with it. The guy on the right is Peter Thiel. His parents were missionaries. He claims to be a Christian now. He's gay. He's a enthusiastic promoter of transhumanism. He's also the founder of PayPal. Okay, he has lots of money. And he puts it into transhumanist efforts. He believes, his argument is actually theological. He believes that it's part of the creation mandate for us to be like gods. Okay, because isn't that our destiny as believers? Aren't we going to be transformed and glorified? Isn't the earth supposed to be Eden? Well, all the answers to all those questions are yes in biblical theology. So he's like, well, let's go to it. Okay? We need to transform ourselves to really escape humanity, become more than human, to become as much like God as we can. Because that way we can image him better. It's the destiny of our image. We're God's imager. So he actually makes a theological argument for transhumanism. But he's one of these guys you probably never heard of unless you happen to read the small matter, PayPal or something like that. His books, Religion and Transhumanism, The Unknown Future of Human Enhancement, The Singularity is Near, Kurzweil's famous book, When Humans Transcend Biology. And this is something I would recommend you watch. It's a movie documentary, Transcendent Man. It really just follows Kurzweil around and tells his story. And he's actually a really sympathetic figure. He's not like the demon or the devil or something like that. He's really driven by the loss of his father. He wants literally to bring his father back. And he is driven by this. And personally, again, he's a very sympathetic figure in the film. He's invented lots of inventions that have helped millions of people all over the world. Again, he's very wealthy, like Theo. But this is the thing that drives him, transhumanism. So I recommend it. It's really worth watching. Another book, Regenesis, if you read, especially my latest novel, The Quartet, I talk about synthetic biology. This is sort of the primer for synthetic biology. If you don't know what synthetic biology is, right now we have the capability to read DNA. Synthetic biology is the ability to write it, to literally, from the atomic level on up, create life forms that have never existed before and that can't naturally exist. Okay, this will make us as gods in a very real sense. And people are doing synthetic biology now on a very small scale. It's not an easy thing. But George Church, who I believe he's either at Harvard or MIT, I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but this is his book introducing the concept as best he can on a more popular level, rather than having grad students. Engines of Creation, Coming Era of Nanotechnology. This is one of the formative, sort of, again, popular academic books to talk about nanotechnology, which is the science of the extremely small. Okay, so you make, engines that, a nanometer, which is like, I don't know, what is it, 100,000th width of a human hair or something like that. And you can only see them operate under a high-powered microscope, but they're functioning machines. So there's all sorts of things you could do with nanotechnology. On the way here, I came across another article on nanotechnology where they were trying to, the idea was they're trying to take cancer-fighting, they're trying to take cancer-fighting agents, drugs, but actually transform them into what the body will interpret as blood cells, and so that they will sort of live among the infected areas and actually sort of merge with them, and then by definition get rid of the cancer at a cellular level. But they're little machines. I mean, we just don't think this kind of thing is possible. You can go to a grad school and do this and get a degree. Okay, nanotechnology is here. Synthetic biology is not quite where nanotechnology is. That's also here. And for the transhumanists, this is awesome. Because let's just simple application. Why do people die? I mean, other than accidents. Okay, it's going to be age, which just means your body breaks down at a cellular level. Okay, that's what aging is. Or disease. Okay. Well, what if we could somehow figure out why cells die and then either retard or reverse the process at a cellular level? Then unless you do something stupid or you get hit by a car, you're not going to die. You do the same thing with disease. Again, this is the Kurzweil vision, immortality, or again, extending human life potentially to extraordinarily long lifespans, and ultimately, something that we would look at as immortality. Again, you could get injured and get killed and all that kind of stuff, but the course of a natural life being indefinite, because your body will just keep reversing the effects of aging at a cellular level. That's ultimately what transhumanists are thinking about. And they're thinking about other bizarre things, like taking properties of animals, giving them to ourselves, through genetic manipulation. They said to Will, "Won't you want to be Spider-Man?" But I mean, it's a cartoon, it's a comic book, but that's actually the kind of things they're talking about. doing something to our soldiers in the military so that they don't have to sleep. This is where the discussion's at now. So that they don't get tired. That'd be great if a soldier never got tired. Well, why do we have to sleep? How does our body work? What makes it sleep? If it doesn't sleep, what are the harmful effects? Can we reverse those? Can we retard those? How about, little ants can carry 8 times their body weight. Well, how do they do that? What enables that? What physiologically enables that? Can we do that with a human? It's just questions like that. They're just asking very simple, straightforward questions. Now that the ability to again, change DNA is on the table. Of course, this, you don't even have to change it. You just write it yourself. You make what you want. It's a designer kind of thing. So we talked about nature, we talked about ourselves, either inner transformation or escaping what we are as humans, augmenting ourselves. Some will say, though, that the deity of the future that they prefer is the transcendent other. And that is something that isn't human by definition. So the obvious go-to choice here is artificial intelligence. Again, just a sample of the discussion in the book. Our final invention. Don't you just love the title? Artificial intelligence and the end of the human era. Others, though, would prefer the extraterrestrial as the transcendent other. Of course, Gardner's book has them both in his title, the AI, ET, and the cosmic intelligence, and all that stuff. Now, this book I highly recommend. James Herrick is an evangelical scholar. He's a communications scholar in Michigan. And this is a terrific book because what he does is he goes through, again, he does a little bit with popular media, like movies, but it's really sort of an intellectual history of how the idea of extraterrestrial life has been used and is being used to sort of re-articulate traditional religion. So it's a really nice overview of that idea. Other books, again, these are all academic presses, even though this one's cover looks kind of silly. Springer is a major academic publisher. Beyond UFOs, the search for extraterrestrial life and the astonishing implications for our future, vast universe, extraterrestrials, and the Christian revelation. This is kind of a boring read. It's a typical Catholic view of this, but it's a mainstream title. Religions and extraterrestrial life, how will we deal with it? And academics are talking about this 2 years ago at the Society of Biblical Literature / American Academy of Religion meeting, which was in Baltimore. They devoted an entire afternoon, a 4-hour session, to astrobiology and the implications of extraterrestrial life for religion. Okay, I went to it. Some people I knew there, some people I'd never heard of before, but I went to it because, I never thought I would see that at the AAR meeting. So it was for real? Yeah, it was for real. And then again, I wanted to sit in on. I've read a lot of material, academic material on this question. So I wanted to meet a few people and just hear the papers. This is a mainstream discussion. Okay, this is not Ancient Aliens on the History Channel with Giorgio with the freaky hair. Okay, this is a mainstream academic discussion. These titles, again, all academic titles: Alien Worlds, implications of what I can't read my small thing. Social and religious dimensions of extraterrestrial contact, ET culture, and an anthropology perspective. What would ETs be like culturally? It's all speculation, but again, they're trying to take an anthropological approach. This one is really interesting. Contact with alien civilizations. Our hopes and fears about encountering extraterrestrials, because Michael Michaud, well, I'm not going to click out to the link, was one of the chief architects of the United Nations language and policy on what happens if we encounter extraterrestrials. Okay, so that alone makes the book interesting. Evolution from space. Okay, panspermia is sort of a subset of this transcendent other. And it dovetails a little bit with where Gardner was at with biocosm, where extraterrestrials created this universe. Panspermia is a little less ambitious. Panspermia is just the idea that extraterrestrials seeded life on this planet. You know, it's not as big as creating the whole universe like Gardner's talking about. But evolution from space, Sir Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, who is still, I don't know about Hoyle, but Wickramasinghe is still alive and kicking and really excited about, you know, finding water on Mars. He promotes panspermia everywhere. He's a scientist, he's an astrobiology guy. Life itself, its origin in nature, Francis Crick. Anybody know who Francis Crick is? He's one of the co-discoverers of DNA. Okay. He believed panspermia, that we were, you know, our life here on the planet was seeded by aliens, was a worthwhile idea to think about. You know, he'll actually say things like the genetic code is just so complex, it just couldn't have evolved randomly. It had to be created by intelligent designers. I mean, God forbid we go to God, so we've got to, again, make it the extraterrestrial. But he's the co-discoverer of DNA. Here's a paper, front page of it anyway, it's a screenshot, by Crick and Leslie Orgel on directed panspermia. There's actually more than one view of panspermia. Undirected is sort of its accidental. Little microbial particles are floating around in space and they just randomly land here on Earth and poof, there we get life. Directed panspermia is the idea that aliens came here and planted life. Okay, so this is a peer-reviewed journal article. Icarus is the journal, back in the 70s. Crick and Orgel on directed panspermia, laying out why they think this is reasonable, a reasonable alternative. Now, again, we're talking about what is the deity or the deities, again, to a post-Christian generation. And I came across a couple of years ago something called the Cosmist Manifesto. See if some of this doesn't sound familiar. The author is a fellow named Gertzel. Here are the tenets of the Cosmist Manifesto. Humans will merge with technology to a rapidly increasing extent. A new phase of the evolution of our species. Humans will develop sentient AI, artificial intelligence, and mind-uploading technology. Well, why would we want that? Well, that permits an indefinite lifespan to those who choose to leave biology behind. Humans will spread to the stars and roam the universe. We'll meet and merge with other species out there. 4, humans will develop interoperable synthetic realities, virtual worlds able to support sentience and self-awareness. Some uploads will choose to live in virtual worlds, and some won't. The distinction will blur. Humans will develop space-time engineering and scientific future magic, much beyond our current understanding and imagination. Space-time engineering and future magic will permit achieving by scientific means most of the promises of religions, and many amazing things that no human religion ever dreamed. Eventually, we'll be able to resurrect the dead by copying them to the future. Create a new folder. You know, Control-C, Control-V. Intelligent life will become the main factor in the evolution of the cosmos to steer it toward an intended path. Are you getting warm, fuzzy feelings yet? Technological advances will reduce material scarcity. Of course. It'll give us the utopia. It'll give us Eden. No want, all abundance. New ethical systems will emerge based on principles including the spread of joy, growth, and freedom through the universe. All these changes will fundamentally improve the subjective and social experience of humans. Of course, they'll never have any bad results. What could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? Again, nature is our God. We're our own gods, or the transcendent other. either created by us, either augmenting ourselves, or our extraterrestrial saviors will show up at some point and take care of all of our problems and vault us to the next stage of human evolution. Those are the gods of the future. And really, in some ways, the present. What is the salvation of humankind then? Well, according to the Cosmos Manifesto, technological advances will reduce material scarcity drastically. So the earth will save us. Salvation means we finally take care of these problems of unequal wealth and food scarcity and all this environmental stuff. Technology will come along to cure all those ills. The earth will save us. Or we will save ourselves. Humans will develop sentient AI and mind uploading technology. We won't ever really die anymore. We'll either figure out a way through nanotechnology or synthetic biology to live indefinite lifespans, free of disease. And our technology will make sure that our environment is perfect. There'll be no want, no disease. Yeah, we'll be gods in our own Eden. And resurrect the dead by copying them in the future. So, in this view, humanity is not lost in sin. Well, there's really no such thing as sin. That's an antiquated notion. But they're just in the primitive stages of biological, spiritual, and social evolution. That's our problem. We're just relatively still primitive. Humanity in its present condition is a threat to itself, and it has to be saved by a greater intelligence. Now, I didn't put anything up here, but you realize what all this science talk is doing. It's legitimizing what some have termed a scientific dictatorship over the planet. A scientific elite, because they can deliver all these goods, they're the ones who need to be running the world. What could go wrong? So, a summary. Post-Christian theology, very monistic, all is one. There's no separate creator unless you're Gardner and have your ETs. But then, of course, it asks the question where they come from. Probably other ETs. You have intelligent design without a personal God. ET gods are acceptable. To a materialist, to someone who doesn't believe in, again, theistic concept of God, an ET is an acceptable God because he's just so superior. Salvation by knowledge. Well, we've got monism, we've got salvation by knowledge. Well, what's the knowledge? Well, nature, science, and technology, just a different kind of knowledge. Not that we are ourselves divine, although we could actually say that, because if the ETs actually put us here and they are our gods, then yeah, we ought to be like joining them. We ought to be evolving to what they are. We ought to be becoming one with them, gods with them. So you can kind of, it's just a little technological tweaking, 21st century tweaking of Gnostic ideas. And, ultimately, if we transcend humanity, we are, in some sense, beyond humanity. We become divine in that sense. We become gods. Space becomes the new heaven, purged of religion. Extraterrestrials are the new gods. Salvation is either ET contact or, again, evolving beyond what we are. And the result is the new Eden, just like the Bible says. Just like the book of Revelation is. No scarcity, disease, or death. So how are these ideas, again, communicated? Again, when we go through pop culture, again, I don't want you to think that, Mike thinks like every movie is sinister. I don't think most of them are sinister. Deliberately sinister. What they're trying to do, and what they do really well, is they get you to think about God or gods, again, whatever that thing is beyond humanity, in a new way. That actually fits into a non-theistic, traditional theistic paradigm. So you redefine who the gods are, what a god is. You put your faith, again, in the ones who can give you that advanced scientific knowledge, the knowledge of the gods. Or you evolve to that point yourself. Or you augment yourself through transhumanism. Again, these basic ideas, redefining what it means to be human, redefining who God or the gods are, creating a path through human participation or endeavor. Really, in some of these scenarios, humans are the architects of the new Eden, or they have help from ET. Again, all these biblical themes about becoming divine, imaging God, new Eden, global Eden, no scarcity, utopia, all this perfection, heaven come to earth. They're just all redefined, okay, into new ways that turn out to be very antithetical to biblical theology. This is Carl Sagan in the 70s. There is today, this is in the 70s, in a time when old beliefs are withering, a kind of philosophical hunger, a need to know who we are, how we got here. There's an ongoing search, often unconscious, for a cosmic perspective to humanity. It's over 40 years ago. I'd say that's quite true still today. Kurzweil was a little more abrupt. We need a new religion. Usually a man of lots of words, but pretty well summarizes it there in a few. This is going to be Herrick. Again, he's the Christian author of Scientific Mythologies. He says, there is an emerging canon of transcendent stories that provides meaning to our lives, the myth-making work of two powerful engines of cultural influence, speculative science and the works of science fiction. They present to us a much-needed alternative to more traditional perspectives on God, people, and the destiny of the human race. An alternative that will open a spiritual pathway to the increasingly technological future. Yeah, that's exactly what we see. And I want to introduce you to this guy. This is Jeffrey Kripal, who teaches at Rice, PhDs from the University of Chicago Divinity School. He is in the academy, one of the leading voices to promote these ideas to academics. We're going to get to pop culture in a moment. This is his book, Mutants and Mystics, Science Fiction, Superhero Comics, and the Paranormal. He's also the author of a book called Authors of the Impossible. It's an intellectual defense of the paranormal. Okay. Kripal is a serious scholar. He teaches philosophy and religious thought. This is a very dense book. Okay? Unless you're used to reading really highbrow academic stuff, I don't recommend it. But it's pretty awesome in terms of if you can handle that kind of thing, it's quite good. He covers the gamut of all sorts of stuff, again, in the paranormal orbit, comic books, how these things become vehicles to, again, transmit these ideas through popular culture. And he is a practicing Gnostic as well. That is his faith. Kripal identifies a super story, a modern living mythology that underlies and shapes not only science fiction and superhero literature, but also contemporary American popular culture, in particular beliefs concerning alien contact and humankind's place in the cosmic scheme of things. Kripal shows how American science fiction and fantasy fiction owes less to science than does the 19th century esoteric traditions, like theosophy, which borrowed from Gnosticism. Earlier occult systems. This is really the value of what Kripal does. He's really familiar with the literature. Kripal also points out the first explicit claim of extraterrestrial intervention in human evolution is found in Madame Blavatsky's writings. Blavatsky was a prolific theosophist in the 19th century. Just quoted, everywhere. Advanced spiritual beings from Venus helped breed the Atlantean root race from the Lemurian root race. By the way, that's ancient astronauts. That's the History Channel. How is this communicated again? This goes all the way back. Look at the dates. This is the 18th century now, getting into the 18th century. Conversations on the plurality of worlds. Now, the discussion of the plurality of worlds is much older than this. It goes all the way back to Aristotle. Christian theologians like Augustine talked about other worlds all the time. And there were varying opinions on whether it was a legitimate idea or not. I think it's fair to say from the Middle Ages on to the advent of Darwinism, the idea of other worlds was embraced by the church, by the believing church. You can find famous Reformed evangelists and preachers promoting the idea. And it was because they thought to deny the idea was to limit or impinge upon God's omnipotence. Well, of course there could be other worlds. Why? We're not going to say God couldn't have done something. Okay, so that was the basic logic. It changed with the advent of Darwinism, because then the scientific community began to apply evolutionary thinking to the idea of other worlds. And then the church sort of, it became icky to talk about. But the idea of sort of interaction between extraterrestrial races and our history is really traceable primarily back to this book, the 17th century. Here is, I think, an easier book to read. In fact, I know it's an easier book to read because I read both of them. Our Gods Wear Spandex. Okay? A Secret History of Comic Book Heroes. This is a terrific book. Don't be misled by the cover. Of course, the cover is clever. You know, The Last Supper, Da Vinci, and all that, you know, with the comic book characters in here. What Knowles does is just goes through the history of comic books, all the way back into the 20s. It shows how their predominant themes are, again, extraterrestrial gods. And in some comic book series, they're actually called the Archons. You know, comic book writers are not stupid. They're actually really bright. The guys who actually do the writing, some of them were just pretty awesome, to be honest with you. Very, very well read. And they're transmitting these older ideas for their audience in story form. That's all they're doing. It's all comic book song. Superheroes, of course, are part human or part non-human as well. They're evolving, they're mutants, they're technologically augmented, you get the picture. And they're also sort of divinities in human form. Okay, for those of you who are older, you might be thinking of this example, 2001, A Space Odyssey, okay, Arthur C. Clarke. Of course, the ending scene where Dave, you know, is sort of like transformed into this, you know, fetus or infant, you know, to go out and inhabit the stars and all that sort of stuff. And kind of creepy looking, but if you've seen the movie, you're familiar with the imagery. Again, doesn't it look curiously like the alien figure that you see? What a coincidence. Now they were lords of the galaxy and could roam at will among the stars. 2001. But today we have Iron Man. What is Iron Man? He's a transhuman. It's augmented a lot. I think it's funny too. Who's Captain America? He's an augmented human. Remember, they stick the needle in him and he becomes this more than human person now. The Hulk is a sadly augmented human. Not according to his own volition, but by accident. Spider-Man, also by accident, is an augmented human. The X-Men, mutants and augmentation, genetic freaks. Superman, of course, is not an augmented human. He's a god, an extraterrestrial god. This is the scene from the most recent Superman movie, when he goes back to Earth to save the Earth. It's a cruciform position. If you actually see it, again, it's very deliberate. He leaves the craft and he's like this. Then it goes back to Earth to save everybody. And it's just messaging. It's theological messaging. Thor and Odin, the All-Father, they are gods, extraterrestrial gods. Close Encounters. Christian minister, have you ever seen Close Encounters? Okay. It's a favorite movie of mine. But when they finally encounter the extraterrestrials and they send humans aboard the ship, there's a scene where a Christian minister reads Psalm 91:11 before the humans that were chosen to join the aliens do so, which reads, "For he will command his angels concerning to guard you in all your ways." Always just praying that the angels will protect while they're gone with the ETs. Sure, you can read it that way. But you can also read it that the ETs are the angels. ET, of course, possesses powers to heal and fly, has a spiritual connection with little Elliot, and naturally rises from the dead. Isn't that nice? And have you seen Knowing? Don't laugh because it's Nicolas Cage, okay? You get so picked on. But this is really a great film. Again, if you like this sort of thing, if you like to watch science fiction, like I do, just for the messaging, okay? Knowing is about, let's see what time it is. I don't want to go too far over 12:04. I'll just wrap it up here in a bit. But this is Nicolas Cage's little boy, and he finds a time capsule at school. Something that the school had planned, like, X number 30 years or whatever before. So the kids dig this up, and they all get, a little message, from the time capsule. And his is a sheet of paper with nothing but numbers on it. Just weird. And the story is how the kid who created this X number of years ago would sort of just like trance out and just start writing numbers, just rapid fire, a series of numbers. And it turns out that the numbers correspond to dates and the number of casualties in a tragedy. They're in combination. And Cage figures this out. So the kid was getting downloaded information about a series of tragedies throughout the last 30 years that all came true on the date with the exact number of casualties. In the end, the last one says EE with the date, which you find out means everyone else. It's the apocalypse. Okay. And of course, we have to be delivered from the apocalypse. This is a familiar, artist's rendition of Ezekiel's wheel. But today we have really good graphic capabilities. Today we have CGI. So if you want to do a rendition of Ezekiel's wheel, and these are the guys that show up at the house who never speak. It turns out they're angels, but they're not really angels, they're aliens. Okay? They're there to protect the kid. But you get this, I couldn't find a really good image of this. But this is the craft right here, and when it unfolds, you have a series of wheels surrounded by wings and creatures, with face, it's the whole Ezekiel's wheel thing. But the kids are picked up, the little boy and his friend, to populate it. What does it mean? Okay, there's the tree of knowledge. Okay, right there, our Edenic utopia. Humanity will be saved from the apocalypse, and the earth burns up and everybody else is killed, except for the kids. Well, let me just quote one of the angel aliens. The only ones who are allowed to go with them are those who were called. They mentally have this connection. So the dad, Nicolas Cage, has to stay behind, but the kid gets to go. Prometheus is sort of an in-your-face example of this. This is the prequel to the Alien series of the 80s. Prometheus is just filled with Christian and real Christian, Gnostic, and Greek mythological symbolism. I don't have the time to really get into it, but if you look at, again, who's doing it, You got Ridley Scott up here. Damon Lindelof is the writer who also wrote some of these things, Star Trek, Cowboys and Aliens. He's very into the ancient astronaut kind of stuff, and this is the direction Ridley Scott takes his movie, takes Prometheus. Humanity was created by the engineers who go on a lifeless Earth, and the engineer here drinks something right here, and then his body disassembles. But his DNA, again, unites with the chemical elements here on Earth, and ultimately man is produced from the extraterrestrial. Interestingly enough, the engineers, when they get these messages or these symbols, and they go, find who their makers were, people do in the story, they turn out to be giants, which is kind of interesting. And in movies.com, I'll end with this one. You go to an interview with Ridley Scott with movies.com, the interviewer says, "We had heard it was scripted that the engineers were targeting our planet for destruction because we had crucified one of their representatives. Jesus was an extraterrestrial. And that Jesus might have been an alien. Was that ever considered, Ridley?" We definitely did. And then we thought it was a little too on the nose. But if you look at it as our children misbehaving down there scenario, there are moments where it looks like we've gone out of control, running around with armor and skirts, which of course would be the Roman Empire. They could go long run, 1,000 years before their disintegration started to happen. And you could say, let's send one or more of our emissaries to see if we can stop it. Guess what? They crucified. That was in the original script of Prometheus. Ridley Scott is making a series of sequels to that prequel to keep the Prometheus series going that will eventually, ultimately lead up to the Alien series from the 1980s. But he's already released the new title for the next one, Paradise Lost. What do you think that's going to be about? If you actually watch Prometheus, again, the names of the characters, Mary, Elizabeth, the whole, there's just so much in there that is tagging things in the gospel story, or again, promotes a Gnostic perspective on something. Ridley Scott is being very deliberate in this regard. Is he evil? Is he that smart? Well, probably a little bit of both. This is what he wants to do, and he's being pretty transparent about it. And just go on Netflix, type in some words like supernatural or extraterrestrial. There's just TV shows, movies all over the place, promoting some aspect or multiple aspects of this kind of stuff that we talk about. So you say, well, nobody's going to really believe this. What's the big deal? Nobody's going to believe it. It's fun. I like to watch movies too. But the thing is, in our culture, the ideas that this promotes are already believed by many people. They've already divorced themselves from the Judeo-Christian God and what how we think of Jesus. They've already done that. That is ancient history. They have passed that milestone already. And what are they going to replace it with? Where is the faith then? Well, it's in nature. We have to save nature. It's in science. We have to do something with ourselves to save ourselves from ourselves. We have to be augmented. We have to transcend what we are as humans if we're going to survive. Or we have to go out and populate space. Maybe we'll be lucky enough to meet our makers there and the answers to all our problems. This is already part of modern thinking. This is not a leap. And it's just that movies like this help acclimate people to a certain set of ideas. They're not overtly hostile to this thing over here, but they just sort of erase it because they direct attention over here. And that's just how it's done. So, I don't want to tell you, don't go to a movie and enjoy. You should go and you should watch it. You should think about what the messaging is. Some of the books I put up here would actually help you do that, because they'll just start things to go off in your head. I know why he's doing this. I know where that comes from. I know what he's going to connect it to. I know what they're going to do with this. It'll help you be a more intelligent viewer. So I'm not saying don't watch them. I'm saying do watch them, but be really cognizant of this. Well, again, today's just random topic day, somewhat random. And this is one, and the next one will be, again, a little bit biblically oriented, but kind of a different take on things. I'm willing to bet that what we'll go through here in this session will be something that you have not heard before with respect to all the wrangling over creation versus evolution and all this, the talk about Genesis. What I want to introduce you to is really the way Hebrew scholars, the way Old Testament scholars talk about how to interpret Genesis 1. This is what they're talking about, as opposed to, oh, well, let's talk about what the Hebrew word for day, yom, means. Is it 24 hours or is it something else? That's the sort of thing that orients the popular discussion. And that's an issue that is of secondary importance and frankly, in my view, not a whole lot of relevance in certain respects to the whole discussion about creation and how do we read Genesis and all this sort of thing. So what you'll see here is, again, what the way scholars, believing scholars and otherwise, would talk about Genesis 1. And it also, again, will be part of the discussion as to why more than one view of the creative activity of Genesis 1 is possible from the biblical text. Okay, what we're going to talk about here has nothing to do, zero to do with science. Okay? This is just, what does the text say? It's inspired in Hebrew, that ought to matter. What does the grammar of Genesis 1 through 3 tell us? And don't get scared because it's grammar. I think this will be quite understandable for you. So the peripheral issues are the meaning of bara. Okay? This whole argument bara is about creation from nothing. That is demonstrably not true when it comes to exegesis. How do we know that? Real simple. Genesis 1:26, let us create humankind in our image. The verb for create there is bara. Well, we know that Adam and Eve were not created from nothing, don't we? Genesis 2 has Adam being created from the dust of the ground, and it also has Eve being created from the side of Adam. Both human beings are created from pre-existing material, and yet they're described with bara. That alone tells you bara, the word that occurs in Genesis 1:1, the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, does not mean creation from nothing. But you'll read that all over the place. It's just not true. It's not true from the biblical text. We're not going to worry about that. We're not going to worry about yom. Again, hey, yom, when accompanied by a numeral, has to be 24 hours. That's also not true. But again, who cares? This is where the rubber meets the road, right here. The clause structure of Genesis 1 through 3, and I can already see clauses. Using grammatical terms, how am I going to make it through this hour? Okay? Trust me. Just trust me. You'll do okay. What is a clause? If you remember back to English class, a clause is a group of related words containing a subject and a verb. It's a complete thought. Okay? Subject, verb, subject, predicate. That's all it is. It may or may not express a complete thought. There may be peripheral things, but it has a subject and a predication. So in that sense, it's complete. Most clauses that are, independent clauses will have a completion, a complete idea. Others may be dependent on something else to complete their thought. Verb to be expressed or not present, just understood. We do this in English, where we omit subjects or verbs because we could just do that. If I look at Will and say, come here, well, the nonverbal communication completes the idea. I'm talking to him. You come here. I didn't even use the subject, but I can do that. And Hebrew works the same way. Now here's what we're talking about with clauses. Really two types. Independent clause, the group of words that contains a subject and a verb, subject and a predicate, and completes a thought as a complete thought. Here's an example. Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. That is a complete thought. We have a subject, Jim. Here's our predication, studied, and then we have extra circumstances added to it. The thought is complete. You don't need anything else to help you understand what's going on. It's complete in and of itself. Real simple. That's an independent clause. It doesn't need any help. Dependent clauses are a group of words that contain a subject and a verb, but does not express a complete thought. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, you know intuitively that it's not complete. You need something added to it to get the full picture. There's something missing. It needs help to complete the idea. You notice all I did here was add the word when. I took a complete, independent clause and I made it dependent by just putting the word when in front of it. I've added a circumstance that I haven't told you about. That's why it's incomplete. It depends on something else I'm going to say. It does not stand by itself. Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, again, there you have the difference. Just one word. So let's take that sentence, and here's how we would complete it. So we have a dependent clause. When Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam, he was able to concentrate. That completes the idea. I added something at the end. Or I could add something at the beginning. His brother stayed away when Jim studied in his room for his chemistry exam. Okay, that makes this when temporal, and it adds a circumstance that, okay, I understand now what the full picture is. So again, add something at the end or at the beginning. The key issue here is it needs help. Some clauses don't need help, others do. Now, independent or dependent, which is necessary for knowing? What is the main idea and what modifies or describes what? When you string clauses together, you need to know which ones are independent, which ones stand alone, express a complete thought, and which ones are the helpers. Look at this sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now that reads like a complete, independent thought, correct? It can function pretty well on its own. Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And this is just Genesis 1:1-3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now I have deliberately omitted certain punctuation marks because of what we're going to talk about. Here we have 3 verses right here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. You'll notice it's in blue. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This is one way that the first 3 verses could be read. Where verse 2, okay, has to be helped, has to be supplemented in some way to know what its role is. Because when you put the word "now" out front, now the earth was without form and void, it makes you think, well, there was something prior here that I need to help me understand this statement. I need what comes before. So we would say verse 2, okay, is either dependent on or a circumstance to or needs help from the first verse. This is the traditional way that Genesis 1:1-3 is read. We have the first act of creation. We have a circumstance that is sort of the result of the first verse, and then verse 3 comes along and starts adding to the story. It's read sort of linearly, if that's a word. It's a linear reading. So we have, again, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, complete thought. Now the earth was without form and void. Okay, that assumes the first verse we've read. And it, this thought here is sort of a little interruption, a little circumstance, a result of verse 1. And then verse 3, God starts doing something. First creative act, second creative act. This is the traditional way to look at the verses. What if I translated the first verse this way? When God began to create the heavens and the earth, now does that stand alone like this does? No. Because it's leading to something. It's not complete. You say, well, Mike, that's cheating. You can't just change the words of the Bible. Well, let's see. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, complete thought. The Hebrew is these consonants: Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yod, Tav. You'll notice this mark I added, that's a vowel mark. It's the letter A, but it's also a definite article. So to translate Genesis 1:1 this way as an independent clause, a complete thought, not dependent on anything, to say in the beginning, you need the Hebrew text to look like this and have this first vowel. If it was when God began to create, you wouldn't have this, you would have these two little dots. This makes the whole phrase dependent. Now here's your Jeopardy question. Which one do you think is actually in the Hebrew Bible? It's actually this one. The first word of Genesis in all pointed Hebrew manuscripts known to exist is Bereshit, not Ba-Reshit. If it was this, then this is the way we should translate it, because we have to account for the definite article, the word the in Hebrew. That's what the definite article is. We actually don't have the definite article in the Hebrew text. So here's what that means. You should try to translate this without using the word the. Go ahead, give it a try. In beginning, at beginning. The only way you can really do it is to take the preposition here and make it when. But if you do that, then Genesis 1:1 is not the first creative act in Genesis 1:1-3. It just describes a circumstance leading to the first creative act. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, some stuff was going on. Okay? We haven't gotten to yet what God actually does, his first act. See, this makes the verb, you have to translate it, created. This makes creation an act of creation because it's a definite point in time. This one still has creation waiting to sort of happen. God has to get busy yet. We're leading to something. This is actually what you have in the Hebrew Bible. Now again, your typical creation apologist is not going to know this. If he does it, he's not going to tell you probably, because it muddies the waters. But let's see what the effect is. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light. Now you have the first two verses as a circumstance setting up the third verse. You see the subtle difference? This is your independent thought. These both verses are dependent, and they are setting up this one. This is your first creative act in Genesis 1:1-3. Not 1:1, but 1:3. Is your first creative, display of power. You say, well, what's the difference? What's the effect of this? And the Hebrew syntax view. How does that affect the way we understand what's going on? Well, the traditional view reads the first three verses as a chronological sequence. The beginning, God created heaven and the earth. The result was the earth was formless and empty. That's the way it was created, because it was created back here. This was the result. And then God's second act was let there be light. There was light. The alternative says, well, when God began to create the heavens and the earth, here were the conditions. Here's what was going on. The earth was, at that moment, formless and empty. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering. And then God said, let there be light. Do you realize the implications? When God sort of steps up to the plate to start creating, which he's going to do down here, there's already pre-existing material. Now, it begs the question, where'd that come from? Okay. It's a whole different perspective. Now, where it came from is answered in other verses. Colossians 1, that God is, he created all things visible and invisible. Okay, that pretty much covers like everything. You don't get the answer in Genesis 1. You have to go outside Genesis 1 to say, well, God was responsible for this too. It's just that he must have done this earlier, and then, at some point after he did this, God sort of returns to work and says, well, now let's get busy. Let's take that stuff that's already there and start forming and fashioning it for human habitation. Let's make it cool. Let's make it so that we can create humans and have them live on it, enjoy it, and all that kind of stuff. The thing is, if you look at it this way, this is already existing, and you don't know how much time has elapsed between this activity and this activity. There is no way to posit a time sequence. You could have billions and billions, I sound like Carl Sagan now, billions of years in between these two things. So this stuff, the formless and empty earth, could have been around for billions of years before God gets busy and says, now it's time to go to work again. Now it's time to bring humanity into the equation. And they got to live somewhere. We're going to take what's right here, and we're going to make it fit for human habitation. Now, after this event, you go into the rest of Genesis 1, and then you can start talking about, well, is it 24-hour days? Is it something else? Then the discussion becomes meaningful. But even if you decide you've got a sequence of 6 24-hour days after this event, you can still have billions of years before it. The Hebrew Bible is not definite in terms of its time sequence. It just isn't. I don't write the stuff, I just read it. Okay? That's the way it is. So this is really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to beginning the discussion of long ages and the scientific theories about origins of the earth. That's the first time I mentioned science. And I'm doing Hebrew. That's what I do. I don't really care about science until I get to some later point. Is the point. So again, just to summarize that, Genesis 1:1 is not the absolute beginning. According to Hebrew grammar, Genesis 1:1-3 describes an ordering or refashioning of matter that was already existing when God began to work. Now, again, you can talk about bara all you want. I'm not going to go through this. I already gave you the verbal explanation here. Bara, humanity. Well, humanity is not created from out of nothing. Pre-existing material right here. Same thing in Exodus 20:11. There you have the heavens and the earth described with a different verb, not bara. Okay, asa. God made heavens and the earth. And asa is used elsewhere for creation, creative activity using pre-existing material. And that's actually what you see in the first 3 verses of Genesis. But again, this isn't the typical way this is talked about. I hate to say this, but I understand why, why there's the concern with, ages of time and evolution and all that kind of stuff. And I get that. But if you think that Scripture, if you think that Genesis was inspired and God used Hebrew to do that, you might want to pay attention to the language. It just might. But typically, again, in churches and in popular apologetics and websites, you're not going to get anywhere near this. You're never going to hear it. Because they just don't do that. They use these secondary arguments and then create a battle. Where if you just paid attention to it, it might help you. It might help, well, it sort of takes that eons of time thing sort of right off the table, because that's not opposing to the Bible. The Bible doesn't oppose that idea. It presumes it in the first 3 verses. Now, we still have to talk about, okay, what happens afterward, and then, you get into discussion about the words and that sort of thing. But, sometimes we're fighting unnecessary battles. Yom, I'll click out to these, because some of you have probably heard this. Yom with a numeral must mean 24 hours. Actually, it doesn't. Wait till that loads. Go off the line here. What you're going to find with both of these, hopefully this will open quickly. Forgot to open it. What you're going to find with both references, 31:23, is that the word with a numeral has some elasticity to it. So this is the Jacob and Laban story. And so Jacob is running away, from Laban. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued Jacob, for 7 days. Now here we have, again, to show you. There's the word day. It's Yom. Preceding it is a numeral. Now here's the question. Did Laban and his men really pursue Jacob for 7 consecutive 24-hour cycles? Did they not sleep for 7 consecutive days? Did their animals were they able to run and pursue for 7 consecutive 24-hour periods? Or does it just mean, when it was daytime, they were on their horses and chasing after the guy? It's kind of absurd to think that they didn't sleep for 7 consecutive 24-hour periods, and that the animals could, do that. Another example. Jacob and Esau. This is when they finally meet, after being estranged for so many years. Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. He wants, Jacob to come back with him in his place. Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. I'm kind of worried about them. If they are driven hard for 1 day, all the flocks will die. So is Jacob really saying, well, you know what? What Esau is asking me is to have the kids get up and walk, and of course the herds, for 24 hours. Is that really what he's thinking? Hey, hope you all slept before we're starting, because we're not going to sleep for another 24 hours. We're going to walk round the clock for 24 hours. Come on. Okay, that is not what's in view here. So what I'm doing here is, again, just showing you exceptions to the discussion that you probably don't get to hear, because people in this debate are just used, on both sides, are just used to defending turf. And there's a lot more variability here, and a lot more flexibility not with science. I'm not a scientist. Okay, I'm talking about in the text. There is interpretive flexibility here that ought to be part of the discussion and might help soften the rhetoric a little bit. I would hope. The other thing that you're dealing with, and I don't know if you want to go into this or if you want to, it's 1:40. I'll just tell you where I'm at on this. Despite what we just went through with Genesis 1 through 3, my own position on this is that a lot of the discussion, I don't know a better way to put this, but a lot of the discussion really doesn't matter. What matters is affirming a creator. Okay, we're not monists. I'm not a monist. There is a distinction between the creator and the creation, and we are accountable to the creator in all sorts of ways. Okay, that's the issue. I don't think the Bible is here to teach us science in any regard. That's not its purpose. It's written by pre-scientific people that God selected. God knew what he was getting when he tapped someone on the shoulder living in 1500 BC and said, hey, I want you to write something. He knows he's not getting Stephen Hawking. Okay, he knows who they are, and these are God's decisions. Frankly, if God inspired Genesis today and he picked Stephen Hawking, you know what would happen? Hawking would give us this discourse about what, the Big Bang or all this other stuff that happens. And you know what? 1,000 years from now, someone would read what he wrote and think, what a dope. What a dope. Can you believe they believed this back in the 21st century about cosmology? Because 1,000 years from now, or 2,000 years from now, our knowledge of science is going to be well beyond where it is today. And if you wrote Genesis today, the writer would look like an idiot. He would look imprecise. He would look unscientific. If you're going to judge the Bible by science, there is never a point when you're going to be satisfied with it, or that you can be satisfied with it, because science changes constantly. Now, God knows that. It's not an observation that's so brilliant. Okay? This is just life. It's just the way it is. So God knew what he was getting in 1500 BC. He didn't say, now I want you to write a science book. I want you to explain in scientific detail the creation so that 3,000 years from now, people will pick it up and go, wow, what insight. They knew modern cosmology way back then. That's not the point. How do we know that? We know it from lots of ways. There's pre-scientific thinking in the Bible in lots of places. The seat of human thought and emotions were said to be the kidneys or the intestines or the innards or whatever. Now, we know why that is expressed, because when we have thoughts and feelings and emotions, you do feel it there, right? And you have a visceral response. There's this mind-body thing going on. We've all experienced that. But we also know that where the seat of the emotions, where our emotions really come from, and the seat of the intellect is right up here. This is where they come from, your brain. And your nervous system affects other parts of your body based upon what's going on up here. There is no biblical Hebrew word for brain, because they didn't know that, again, the seat of your emotions, the seat of the intellect, the seat of your inner life, they didn't know it wasn't from here, but that's what they could feel in everyday experience. They didn't know that it was centers in your brain. We do. And we have a very secure knowledge of that. You can shut it off and turn it on. We know that for good. And for absolutely. It's just, that's what it is. Hebrews 7 is interesting. This is the passage that talks about Levi paying tithes to Melchizedek while he was yet in the loins of his father. Remember that passage? So the passage is saying, hey, when Abraham met with Melchizedek, and he paid Melchizedek a tithe, and Melchizedek is a superior priestly line, because that's the priestly line that Jesus is going to come from. his point is that the line of Melchizedek is superior to Levi. In fact, Levi, instead of getting tithes, according to Old Testament law, from all like the Levites did from all the other tribes, instead of getting tribes from Melchizedek, Levi paid tithes to Melchizedek while he was still in the loins of his father, before he was even born. Do you realize what that says? It says that a complete human person exists in the male. Okay, we all know where babies come from. They're not the male. There is never a human being that exists as a person in the male. That can only happen with women, okay, after fertilization. Okay, because we believe that the contents of the womb is a whole person. And that's a very biblical view. But here, they add this thought that Abraham's ancestors were somehow floating around in him, or in his sperm, or something. Okay, we know where babies come from. Sperm does not have a person in it. It has to be joined genetically with the genetic material of the woman. This is why we can do artificial insemination. This is, again, we know where babies come from. In the biblical world, it was thought that men implanted the seed, the person, in the woman. And there it would grow. It's a planting metaphor. It's an agricultural metaphor. This is why in the Bible, infertility is never a male problem. Well, I know it worked. I remember when we did it, and you got implanted, and if we don't have children, you're infertile. God's cursing you or something. They don't know about male sterility. They're not biologists. They're not geneticists. So the women always get blamed because that's just the way it looks to the human eye. That's the only explanation they can offer. God's not enabling you to grow this kid inside. Maybe there's something wrong with you. Maybe there's something wrong between you and God. It's never, I must be sterile. I better get that checked out. They have no idea. None. We won't go into this. This is pretty R-rated stuff. And this is going to sound really goofy, but it's true for the ancient world. The whole hair length passage in 1 Corinthians 11, the woman having her head covered, it was believed, and you can look at the medical text of Hippocrates. Remember the Hippocratic oath that doctors take today? Hippocrates and others who predate the biblical period believed that a woman's hair aided her in fecundity, in being able to conceive. The longer a woman's hair was, okay, it would draw the sperm. This is kind of crazy. It would draw the sperm where it needed to go to conceive. It was somehow an agent that worked with sperm, with the male component, to conceive a child. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen. But Hippocrates goes on these long treatises. Here's one of his tests for infertility. He would give a woman it wasn't a pill, but he'd give her something to eat that had a distinct odor to it. Okay? And so, you would eat this with the idea that in 24 hours' time, if I can't smell it, then it must have been drawn into the body sufficiently, specifically down here. This is where babies are. Okay? And so, if I can't smell it the next day, then everything's working right. Then you're fertile. But if I can, then there's something wrong. You're infertile. And you say, that is lunacy. It is. But these are medical texts from the Greco-Roman period. And some of the vocabulary in the medical text shows up in 1 Corinthians 11 when it talks about head covering. It is about as far away from medical science as you can get. But it was common belief. And Paul, again, talks about it with the hair and all that stuff. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about fertility. He's talking about sexual behavior. He's talking about modesty, really, except when he gets to the part of you do this, you have your head covered because of the angels. We don't even want to go there. And that goes back to the Genesis 6 story. Okay? Again, it's part of the story. It's part of the worldview. Now, what did they believe? Israelite cosmology is very transparent. They believed what, frankly, everybody else believed in the ancient world about what the world was, except for one key difference. The world was not created by the gods or by gods splitting in half or by gods having baby gods. They don't believe any of that. The world, as we know it, was created by Yahweh. Okay? But what they thought about the world was, again, pre-scientific. So, again, it's a very typical view. Let me just show you real quickly, run through this real quickly. Ancient cosmology had a three-tiered worldview. You have heavens above, earth beneath, the water that is under the earth. Exodus 20. The New Testament has the same idea. Therefore God has highly exalted him, bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven, in earth, or under the earth. Three-tiered cosmology. Revelation 2:5, no one in heaven or earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look upon it. All these regions are inhabited. Heaven, earth, and under the earth, which was, again, it's kind of a sinister place. Here's what biblical cosmology actually looks like. You have the earth is flat and round, it's a circle. It's encased by a dome, which is solid. The stars are affixed to the dome. There are windows and doors of heaven that release water. There's water above the firmament, above the earth, above the dome. Okay? And this is where God lives, above it all. Underneath there's Sheol, which is a watery abyss. It's also the place of the afterlife. The whole idea that hell is like down there comes from ancient cosmology. Okay? We still use some of this vocabulary. Look at some of the verses. Genesis 1:6. Let there be an expanse, rakia, firmament, in the midst of the waters. Okay? Let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse, the waters under the dome here, down here, on earth, from the waters that were above it. Right here. And this is very common in the ancient Near East. God called the expanse heaven, the sky. Waters above the heavens. Proverbs 8. When he, God, established the heavens, I was there. Wisdom is speaking here. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above. Okay, amatz. It's the same verb that you'll see in Isaiah 44:14 for a tree being solid and firm. So when God made the skies firm above, Job 37, same idea. Can you, O Job, like God, spread out the skies hard as a cast metal mirror? So you could go up in the ancient Israelites thought, if you get high enough, you can knock on it. They thought it was solid. Everybody did. Thick clouds veil him. God lives above all this. He walks on the vault of heaven. Anthropomorphic language again. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. Okay, over the waters that are up here. Yeah, this is their world. From God's eye, looking down, here's the earth, and there's water all around. Okay, this is where the horizon ends and where the dome is going to sort of collapse on everything and hold the waters tight. Okay, and look at some of the language in the Bible. God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place. Well, how can you have waters, plural, in one place? And how can you call those waters seas? This is how. You have various seas around the different geographic zones of the earth, but yet they're in one place. That's how you do it. Proverbs 8, he drew a circle on the face of the deep. Job, he has inscribed a circle on the face of the waters at the boundary between light and darkness. Where's the boundary between light and darkness? It's the horizon. It's where the sun sets, sun rises. light, dark. It's naked eye observation. That's all it is. This is their world. This is how they understand it. But there's no theological ambiguity because they're going to credit the God of Israel for doing this instead of other gods and having baby gods and what all the polytheistic systems do. Again, pillars of heaven, foundations of the heavens, windows of the heavens, doors of the heavens, pillars of the earth. He set the world on the pillars of the earth, foundation of the earth. On what were its bases sunk? Set the earth on its foundations. He spreads out the earth above the waters. This is their world. Okay? We don't want a rabbit trail into Sheol with the Rephaim and all that stuff. Again, that's part of the underworld, but let me see if I had anything in summary. No, I don't. But here's what you got. You have God deciding, look, I have an important message for posterity. I want people to know that I created everything they experience. I created the heavens and the earth, all things, everything, visible and invisible. And I am choosing to start this communication in the 2nd millennium BC. God is smart enough to know what he's getting. He is not getting modern scientists, and he doesn't care. Because what he wants them to write, they are perfectly capable of writing using their own language and their own knowledge base, their own worldview, their own cognitive framework. He wants the world to know who the Creator really is, who created humanity, that humanity is accountable to that Creator. Since he made them, probably has an interest in what happens to humanity. He probably has a destiny in mind for humanity. He probably has a plan for all this. And he is the one in charge. And his plan is the only one that is going to work. The only one that is going to result in humanity being with him, their Creator, forever. So God says, get that done. Tell people that message. See, the thing is, again, if they would have written it in modern science, if the biblical text in the 2nd millennium BC had somehow encrypted modern science, who would have understood it? The writer wouldn't have even understood it. How are the readers going to understand it? How are readers in 1000 AD going to understand it? If the Bible is supposed to communicate, encrypting information makes it non-communicative. It means that all this time, until the 21st century, or the 20th century, all this time, the people who were reading the Bible didn't understand it and couldn't. But see, now that we're with modern science, we can look at Genesis and get quantum physics in there. We can get all sorts of biological stuff in there. It's absurd. And again, if God had done it that way, 1,000 years from now, people are going to be dissatisfied with it because it will be out of date. If you do it this way, and you just let people use the language they have to communicate very clear theological ideas about who they are, who the Creator is, and what that all means, it doesn't matter if it's written in the 2nd millennium BC. If you can sit there and read it and get the message. 1,000 years from now, they can read it and get the message. This is purposeful on God's part. He knew what he was getting, and he knew what he wanted. But what we've done is we have imported our debates, our questions, our troubles, our controversies, and we have imposed them on the biblical text. That's what we've done. And the Bible was not written to us, even though it was written for us. It wasn't written to us. Completely different worldview. So what I like to do when I run into people that, scientists, atheists, whatever, and they, I think the Bible is just a bunch of nonsense, and why do you feel that way? I think it's just crazy town. Look at what it says about creation and all this stuff. We just know better. The Bible doesn't, it just ignores science. It's unscientific, and I just think it's just a joke. So my first question is this. Why are you angry with the Bible for not being what it was never intended to be? Are you mad at your dog for not being a cat? Are you mad at your son for not being a daughter? It makes no sense. Why are you criticizing something for not being what it was never intended to be? If you can explain how that position, that way of thinking makes any sense, then I'll listen to you. Because right now, your position sounds kind of dumb. And I've actually said that to people. And they look at you like you got two heads. Because they realize, yeah, that is what I'm doing. I'm mad at the thing for not being what I want it to be. What I think it should be. So explain to me, Professor, how does that make sense? What else in life do you approach that way? I'm mad at my chair for not being a table. You know, it's ridiculous. Let the Bible be what it is. It is a pre-scientific, Mediterranean-centered document that gives us theological propositions that cannot be tested by science, but they can be tested for coherence. Does it make sense to have a God as opposed to no God? If there is a God, can that God actually do anything? Well, if that God can do anything, might he have the ability to, perish the thought, influence someone to write a sentence? I can do that. Okay, what we believe is actually very, very simple. The existence of God is philosophically more coherent than there not being a God. That's proposition number. That's where it all starts. And if there's a God, can he actually do anything? Because if you start to limit him, then the question is, well, then how do you have God? You know, does it make more sense? Is creation here because it birthed itself into existence? I know I didn't make it, you didn't make it. So did it just like spontaneously generate? I mean, I learned in 10th grade science that there is no spontaneous generation. Did that change? Okay, you know, matter can either be created or destroyed. I mean, again, these fundamental ideas that, again, within the self-contained system, you have to have something happen. There's an effect called creation. There must be a cause. Okay, what is it? So you test these major ideas in the Bible for coherence, for logical coherence. That's the way you approach it. And that's why I'm a theist. It's also why I'm a Christian, because, hey, lo and behold, not only can God influence somebody to write something, but if he's really God, if he really has creative power, like we see in nature, I'll bet God could become a man if he wanted to. Why can't he? What limits him? If he can do this big thing over here, why is this different? And it's just propositions tested for coherence. It has nothing to do with putting anything under a microscope. So if you play that game, if you let people make the Bible something it wasn't intended to be, if you try to pretend it's a science book, you're going to be a sitting duck. Okay, you're going to have angry debates. You're going to make it look like the Bible is this flawed thing. Okay, that it's trying to live up to this scientific plateau and it can't do it. That's where the critic wants you to go. Okay, that's the sweet spot for them, because they can always find something that isn't precise enough, isn't scientific enough. Okay, that's just the nature of the beast. So again, my own view of a lot of this stuff is, a lot of the discussion, although I know why it's important to people to have, ultimately, I don't think it really matters. There are some that do. The creator, creation thing, all that stuff is important. The gospel is important. These are all truth claims. Are they more coherent than something else? And the good news is that for millennia, people have been asking those questions, and guess what? The gospel is still here. It is still here. And it's alive, and it's kicking. It has not been put to rest. It has not been shown to be philosophically incoherent and indefensible. If anything, you have leaders in math and science and in logic Those disciplines are filled with theists and Christians. They are filled. If you don't believe that, I'll give you a website. Go to the American Scientific Affiliation, ASA.org. It's not a young Earth creationist site. It's old Earthers, creationists. But it is a professional scientific affiliation in all disciplines, and everybody who's a member is a Christian. Thousands of them. Go to cccu.org, Christian College Coalition. The member schools, there are a few hundred of them. Guess what? They all have physics departments. They all have biology departments. They all have chemistry departments. Guess what? There are real Christians who have PhDs who write in the same journals, write the same science books, went to the same graduate programs, are belonging to the same, professional societies as anybody else who doesn't believe any of it. So the next time someone tells you it's impossible to be a scientist and a Christian, just, politely say, you're just full of it. Okay, you are underinformed, is the polite way to say it. Explain to me why thousands of examples to the contrary to what you just said are real. Explain that. And they have to give you goofy answers. Well, they're all lying. Well, they all just fake their way through. It's just absurd. It descends into absurdity very quickly. So put the onus on them. Explain to me how all these exceptions to what you believe are real. I can go meet these people now that are living contradictions to what you say. Honestly, that's just more effective. Just a more effective apologetic than saying, well, the Hebrew word yom means, look, they don't care. They don't care. Give them a question that they have to wrestle with. They don't care. Because you're appealing to your Bible. Okay, what I just did for you is I appealed to reality. Okay? These people are real. You can meet them. And they'll tell you just what I'm telling you right now. Okay, I don't need to appeal to a religious book. Okay? I want you to answer this question. Go ahead, do it. Again, I'm sorry for the little rabbit trail there. But again, they look at you like you got two heads, because what they're expecting is they're expecting you to put or pit religion against their science. Don't play the game. Seriously, don't play the game. Give them a question they have to wrestle with that you want answered. You can answer it, well, then, yeah, okay. We got something to talk about now.